You've entered Interstellar Chronicles. Close your eyes and drift into another world, a place where stars whisper forgotten names, where time folds and destinies collide across galaxies. Your journey begins now. The average human met a fierce alien commander and found an unlikely love. HFY Sci-Fi. The galaxy sprawled like a canvas of cold fire, its stars blazing with the weight of countless millennia, each a silent witness to the rise and fall of empires. The Keltari Dominion ruled this vast cosmic expanse with unchallenged supremacy, their towering, scale-clad forms gliding through the void like deities among mortals. Their warships, grown from crystalline seeds that pulsed with symbiotic life, carved paths through nebulae with the precision of a predator's claw, leaving trails of ionized mist shimmering in their wake. Their cities floated among gas giants, spires of crystal and light humming with ancestral songs, while their rituals demanded blood and fire to prove worth. To the Keltari, humans were a fleeting curiosity, soft-skinned, short-lived, and so fragile they seemed destined to crumble beneath the universe's relentless grind, dismissed as starborn vermin unworthy of notice. On the edge of neutral space, aboard the Keltari diplomatic vessel Spear of Dawn, Elias Kane stood alone in a vast chamber of polished obsidian. The walls glowed with bioluminescent veins, their ethereal light casting a ghostly sheen across his unremarkable figure. At 32, Elias was lean from years of dodging asteroid fields and pirate ambushes, his tousled brown hair framing eyes that held a quiet, unyielding intensity. His gray jumpsuit, patched with the scars of countless cargo runs and stained with engine grease, looked like a tattered rag beside the Keltari's opulent armor and robes woven with threads of starlight. He was a freelancer, a nobody in the galactic hierarchy, a pilot who'd scraped by on wits and stubbornness. Yet here he stood, thrust into the role of envoy by a cruel twist of fate, a lone spark in a void of predators. Commander Vera Thalis loomed before him, a vision of lethal elegance that seemed to command the very air around her. 7 feet tall, her obsidian armor pulsed with violet energy, accentuating her angular features and golden eyes that burned with predatory focus. Her scales shimmered like molten starlight, shifting with every subtle movement, and her tail swayed with a rhythm that spoke of both grace and danger. She regarded Elias with a mix of amusement and disdain, her voice a melodic growl that echoed through the chamber, rich with the cadence of a language forged in conquest. "You are the human envoy?" she said, her words sharp with incredulity, a smirk curling her lips. "This spec is what your kind sends to parley with the Dominion?" Elias squared his shoulders, ignoring the snickers from her entourage of warriors and aides, their scales flashing in the dim light like a chorus of mockery. "I'm here for the Terran Coalition," he said, his voice steady despite the weight of their stares, his accent carrying the rough edge of a colony world. "Let's talk terms." Vera's laughter cut through the air like a plasma blade, sharp and mocking, her tail flicking with amusement. "Terms? You presume much, little one. Your species clings to a handful of rocks in a single system, while we command constellations. Why should I waste breath on a creature who will be dust before my next molt?" Her words were a challenge, her golden eyes gleaming with the certainty of her superiority. Yet beneath it, a flicker of curiosity betrayed her. A crack in her armor, faint but real. Elias was no diplomat. He was a freight pilot, a survivor who'd patched his ship, the Wanderer, with duct tape, stubborn hope, and scavenged parts, outrunning raiders and navigating stellar storms that would shred lesser vessels. He'd hauled cargo through lawless sectors, bartered with traders who spoke in riddles, and once outmaneuvered a pirate fleet by diving through a gas giant's rings, his ship's hull glowing red from the friction. A Terran Coalition distress call had stranded him here when their envoy ship was obliterated in a border skirmish, leaving him as the only human within light years to face the Keltari. He was out of his depth, a man who'd never spoken for anyone but himself, now carrying the weight of a colony's survival. But Elias had spent his life finding ways through impossible barriers, and Vera's curiosity, that fleeting spark in her eyes, gave him something to hold on to, a chance, however slim, to reach her. The Keltari were the galaxy's apex predators. their culture a complex mosaic of strength, honor, and unrelenting discipline. Their technology was alive, grown from crystalline seeds that bonded with their biology, forming ships that sang with harmonic resonances, their hulls resonating with the voices of their builders. Their weapons burned with plasma drawn from stellar cores, and their armor adapted to their movements, amplifying their already formidable strength. Their cities were marvels, floating metropolises among gas giants, their spires woven from crystal and light, humming with the songs of ancestors preserved in quantum lattices. Their rituals were brutal yet sacred. Ceremonial duels where warriors spilled their lifeblood to prove worth, trials of endurance in the vacuum of space to test resolve, and rites of passage where young Keltari faced predators bred for war. Emotions were a liability, suppressed through rigorous training or purged in these rites, seen as weaknesses that dulled a blade's edge. To them, humans were an anomaly, a species that should have perished long ago, yet persisted through sheer stubbornness. Whispers had begun to spread through the galaxy. Tales of humans outwitting blockades, rebuilding shattered colonies, and surviving against odds that defied logic, earning them a reluctant, grudging curiosity among the stars. The Spear of Dawn was a diplomatic mission to resolve a border dispute that threatened to ignite a war between the Dominion and the Terran Coalition, a fragile alliance of a dozen human worlds cobbled together for necessity. The Keltari had seized a human mining colony on the edge of their territory, claiming it violated their sovereign space. The colony, a cluster of habdomes on a mineral-rich asteroid named Hope's Cradle, was home to thousands of miners and their families, scraping out a living in the void. They mined rare isotopes for fusion reactors, their labor fueling the Coalition's fledgling economy. But their lives were hard, dust-filled lungs, patched envirosuits, and the constant threat of equipment failure. The Coalition could ill afford conflict with a species whose warships could glass planets with a single volley, and Elias, the only human available after the Coalition's envoy ship was destroyed, was their reluctant stand-in, a pilot-turned-negotiator by necessity. Vera summoned a holographic map, its light casting stark shadows across her scales, the disputed sector glowing in shades of crimson and sapphire. Hope's Cradle floated at the center, a tiny speck amid a web of Keltari patrol routes. "Your settlement encroaches on our domain," she declared, her voice cold as the void, her tail curling with authority. "Abandon it, or we will reduce it to ash." Elias studied the map, his mind racing through patterns honed by years of navigating uncharted routes. He'd memorized star charts and dodged debris fields by instinct, his fingers twitching as if at the controls of the Wanderer. He saw inconsistencies in the Keltari's claims. The colony's coordinates predated the Dominion's expansion, a fact buried in old Coalition records he'd accessed during a sleepless night. "That colony's been there for decades," he said, his tone firm but not confrontational, his voice carrying the cadence of someone used to talking over engine hums. "Your charts are outdated, or you're rewriting them to justify a land grab." A Keltari aide hissed, scales flaring in outrage, their claws twitching toward a ceremonial dagger at their belt, its blade etched with runes of honor. Vera silenced them with a raised hand, her eyes narrowing as she leaned forward, her tail curling slightly, a subtle sign of intrigue. "Bold words for one so small," she said, her voice laced with a challenge, her smirk fading into something harder to read. "Prove your claim, or I'll assume you waste my time." Elias pulled a battered data slate from his belt, its screen cracked but functional, its casing dented from years of rough handling. He uploaded Terran survey records, their timestamps predating the Keltari's expansion by nearly a century, verified by quantum encryption from a time when humans still dreamed of reaching beyond their system. "Check the dates," he said, sliding the slate across the obsidian table, his fingers lingering on its worn edge. "We were there first." Vera's gaze lingered on him, sharp and assessing, as an aide retrieved the slate and interfaced it with the ship's systems, the chamber humming with the soft pulse of Keltari technology. The data was authentic, the timestamps irrefutable, but to Vera, truth was irrelevant without the strength to enforce it. She dismissed Elias to a cramped guest chamber, its walls cold and unyielding, like the Dominion itself. The room was barely larger than a cargo hold, with a single bench, a narrow viewport showing the nebula's swirling hues, and a faint hum that vibrated through the floor. Elias sank onto the bench, rubbing his temples, his body aching from the tension of standing before beings who could crush him with a casual swipe. He felt like a sparrow in a den of wolves, his heart pounding but his resolve unbroken. He thought of the miners, families he'd met on supply runs, children who'd waved at his ship, their faces bright with hope despite their hardscrabble lives. He delivered medicine to their clinic, played cards with their elders in a smoky rec hall, and promised to bring hollow toys on his next run, their laughter echoing in his memory. Their lives were in his hands, and he couldn't let them lose their homes, their futures. In her private quarters, Vera paced, her tail lashing against the crystalline floor, sending faint vibrations through the room. Her armor rested on a stand, its violet glow dimmed, leaving her in a lighter tunic that revealed the intricate patterns of her scales, each a testament to her lineage and battles won. Why does he not cower? She wondered, her claws tapping against her thigh, a restless rhythm. Humans are weak, their lives fleeting, yet this one meets my gaze without fear. Is it foolishness? Or something else? Her culture demanded strength above all, strength of body, of will, of resolve. Elias's quiet defiance gnawed at her assumptions, a puzzle she couldn't solve. She had been raised to see weakness as a sin, a flaw to be purged in blood or fire, yet this human's persistence hinted at a different kind of power, one she couldn't name but felt compelled to understand. She paused by a viewport, the nebula's light casting her reflection in shades of violet and gold, and wondered what her ancestors would think of her fascination with a creature so frail, yet so unyielding. Days of negotiations followed, each session a battle of wills that left Elias drained but determined. His jumpsuit rumpled and his eyes shadowed from sleepless nights spent poring over coalition records. Vera's presence was a constant challenge, her voice a blade that cut through his arguments, her golden eyes dissecting his every word, searching for weakness. He pushed for the colony's autonomy, citing its historical claim and the lives at stake. Thousands of souls who'd built a life from nothing, who'd carved out a home in the void against all odds. He spoke of the miners not as assets, but as people, families, dreamers, survivors who deserved a chance. Vera countered with the Dominion's authority, her arguments rooted in the Keltari's belief that strength was the only currency that mattered, her tail flicking with impatience. But Elias's persistence began to pierce her disdain, his insights catching her off guard, forcing her to see him not as a pest, but as a voice worth hearing. During one meeting, Elias leaned over the holographic map, his fingers tracing a Keltari patrol route with the ease of a pilot who'd navigated worse. His eyes narrowed, catching gaps a warrior might miss, vulnerable supply lines, blind spots where raiders could strike. "You're spread too thin here," he said, pointing to a cluster of coordinates, his voice steady but urgent. "A clever enemy could slip through and hit your convoys before you could respond. I've seen pirates exploit gaps like that. Small ships, fast strikes, gone before you can blink. Lost a cargo of medical supplies to a stunt like that once. Nearly cost me my ship." Vera scoffed, her tail flicking dismissively, a ripple of scales flashing in the light like a warning. "You lecture me on strategy, human? I have led fleets to victory while your kind was still crawling in mud." But her words lacked their usual venom, and her eyes lingered on the map, tracing the routes he'd highlighted. Later, in a private briefing, her tacticians confirmed his analysis, suggesting adjustments that mirrored his suggestions, their voices tinged with reluctant respect. "How does a human see what we overlook?" she thought, her certainty cracking like thin ice. She began to watch him more closely, noting the way he carried himself, not with arrogance, but with a quiet resolve that seemed to defy his frail form. His hands, scarred from years of manual repairs, moved with precision, whether rewiring a console or gesturing during negotiations. His eyes, though tired, never wavered from hers, a defiance that was not aggression but something deeper, more enduring, a fire that burned beneath his unassuming exterior. At a Keltari ritual banquet, Elias sat among towering warriors, his presence as out of place as a pebble in a riverbed. The table groaned under platters of sizzling, luminescent dishes. Their aromas a mix of spice, metal, and something faintly organic, like the breath of a living ship. A steaming bowl was placed before him, its fumes stinging his eyes and making his throat burn before he even tasted it. He took a bite, and fire exploded across his tongue, searing his throat and bringing tears to his eyes. He coughed violently, his face flushing, drawing raucous laughter from the Keltori. A warrior pounded the table, scales flashing in mirth, his voice booming over the din. "The human wilts at our table," he roared, his claws clinking against a goblet of glowing liquor. "Perhaps we should feed him hatchling gruel instead." Elias wiped his eyes with the back of his hand, grinning through the pain despite the fire in his mouth, his breath ragged but his spirit unbroken. "Spicy," he rasped, forcing another bite to prove a point, his voice hoarse but laced with humor. "Had worse on a backwater station once. Cook there used engine coolant for flavor, swore it was a delicacy. Took me a week to taste anything else." The laughter faltered, replaced by murmurs of surprise as he finished the bowl, his face flushed but unbowed, his hands steady despite the tremor of pain. The warriors exchanged glances, their amusement tinged with a grudging respect, their scales dimming slightly as they reassessed the frail human before them. Vera, seated at the head table, watched him closely, her golden eyes narrowing, a faint smile tugging at her lips. "He endures humiliation without breaking," she thought, her tail curling thoughtfully. "Why, her people would have demanded a duel to reclaim honor, their blades drawn at the slightest slight," but Elias laughed it off, his resilience strange and unsettling. It was not the strength of claws or scales, but something intangible, a fire that burned beneath his fragile skin, a spark that refused to be extinguished. Later that night, Elias wandered to an observation deck, drawn by the nebulous swirling hues of violet, gold, and crimson, like a cosmic watercolor painted across the void. He leaned against the transparent bulkhead, his breath fogging the surface, and stared into the expanse, his reflection a faint ghost against the stars. It reminded him of his childhood on a dusty colony world, where he'd lie on the roof of his family's hab and dream of the stars, his sister beside him, spinning tales of alien worlds. Back then, the galaxy had seemed full of promise, a frontier of endless possibilities. Now, it was a battlefield, and he was woefully outmatched. But he'd never been one to run from a fight, no matter the odds. He thought of his parents, lost to a raider attack when he was 10, their head burning as he hid in a crawlspace, the screams of his neighbors haunting his dreams. The memory was a scar, but it drove him to keep going, to fight for those who couldn't fight for themselves. The miners, the children, the families who trusted him to carry their hope. Vera found him there, her armor dimmed to a soft glow, her presence less imposing than in the audience chamber, her movements silent as a shadow. She wore a lighter tunic, her scales shimmering in the nebulous light, each a testament to her battles and her bloodline. "You do not belong here, human," she said, but her tone carried less venom, almost a question, as if testing him, her tail curling slightly as she approached. Elias glanced at her, a half-smile tugging at his lips, his eyes warm despite the weight he carried. "Maybe not," he said, his voice soft, his gaze returning to the stars. "But I'm here anyway, so are you. Why'd you become a commander?" Her scales flared, caught off guard by his boldness, a ripple of light dancing across her form like a startled flame. She stepped closer, her claws clicking softly against the deck, her presence filling the space between them. "To serve the Dominion," she said, her voice firm but tinged with something softer, a hint of the woman beneath the warrior. "To be unbreakable, to lead my people to glory. It is my purpose, etched into my blood, my scales, my very being. My clan has served for generations, our honor forged in battle, our names carved into the stars." Elias nodded, his gaze distant, his hands resting on the bulkhead. "I get that," he said, his voice carrying the weight of his own losses. "I fly because it's the only place I feel free. Out there, it's just me and the stars. No borders, no rules, just the next horizon. You ever feel that out here commanding a ship like this, like the galaxy's yours, even for a moment? Vera tilted her head, her golden eyes searching his face, as if trying to unravel a riddle, her tail swaying slowly. Freedom? The word was alien, a human concept she'd been taught to scorn as frivolous, weak, a distraction from duty. Yet his voice carried a weight that stirred something deep within her, a longing she'd buried beneath layers of discipline and honor. The stars are my battlefield, she said slowly, her voice thoughtful, her scales reflecting the nebulous light in a cascade of colors. I do not chase horizons. I conquer them. For my people, for my clan. Elias chuckled softly, the sound warm in the quiet of the deck, his eyes crinkling with a humor that disarmed her. Fair enough, he said, leaning back against the bulkhead. But sometimes the best fights are the ones you choose, not the ones you're given. Like this one, standing here arguing for a bunch of miners I barely know. Feels right somehow. She stared at him, her scales shifting subtly, a dance of light that mirrored the nebulous swirl. For the first time, she wondered what it would be like to see the galaxy through his eyes. Not as a dominion to be ruled, but as a frontier to be explored, a place of possibilities rather than conquests. The thought was unsettling, yet it lingered, a seed planted in the cracks of her worldview, a challenge to the rigid code that had defined her life. Their exchanges grew less hostile over the following days, a tentative bridge forming between them, fragile but growing stronger with each encounter. Vera began to notice Elias's quiet kindness, how he thanked her crew for small courtesies, like refilling his water canister or guiding him through the ship's labyrinthine corridors, his voice warm with genuine gratitude. He repaired a flickering console in the negotiation room without being asked, his fingers deft as he rewired its circuits, muttering to himself about shoddy maintenance, his jumpsuit stained with fresh grease. Old habit, he said when she caught him at it, wiping his hands on his thighs with a sheepish grin. Can't stand a ship that's falling apart. Reminds me of my first hauler. Thing was held together with spit and prayers. She is not like us, she thought, but he is not nothing. His actions, small and unassuming, began to chip away at the prejudices she'd held as truth, each gesture a challenge to her belief that strength was only measured in might. The negotiations dragged on, mired in mutual distrust, each session a marathon of arguments and counterarguments. Elias pushed for the colony's autonomy, citing its historical claim and the lives at stake. Thousands of souls who'd built a life from nothing, who'd carved out a home in the void against all odds. He spoke of the miners with a quiet passion, not as assets, but as people, families, dreamers, survivors who deserved a chance. He described the children who'd run alongside his ship when he landed, their laughter echoing through the habdones. The elders who'd shared stories of Earth, a world most had never seen. The clinic worker who'd stayed up all night to save a miner crushed by a cave-in. Vera countered with the Dominion's authority, her arguments rooted in the Keltari's belief that strength was the only currency that mattered. Her tail flicking with impatience, her voice a blade that cut through sentiment. But she began to listen, not just to his words, but to the conviction behind them, the way his voice softened when he spoke of the children, or the elder who'd shared a flask of homemade liquor during a late-night card game, the taste of it burning like hope. It was a perspective alien to her, one that clashed with the Keltari's view of the galaxy as a hierarchy of power, yet it resonated in ways she couldn't ignore, stirring doubts she'd never dared to entertain. One evening, Elias lingered in the negotiation room after a particularly grueling session, studying the holographic map, his jumpsuit rumpled and his hair disheveled, his eyes shadowed but sharp. He traced the contours of the disputed sector, muttering coordinates under his breath, his fingers twitching as if plotting a course. Vera entered, intending to retrieve a data crystal, but paused when she saw him, her tail curling slightly, a silent question. You do not rest, she observed, her tone more curious than accusatory, her scales catching the map's glow. Elias glanced up, rubbing the back of his neck with a tired smile, his voice rough from hours of debate. Can't afford to, he said, leaning back in his chair. Those people are counting on me. I'm not their leader, not even their friend, really. Just a guy who happened to be nearby. But I know what it's like to lose everything. I was a kid when my home got hit by raiders. Watched my family's have burn, hid in a crawl space while it all fell apart. Heard my sister scream, couldn't do a damn thing. I won't let that happen to them, to those kids, those families. They deserve better. Vera's tail stilled, her eyes softening imperceptibly. A rare crack in her warrior's facade. Her scales dimming as if to mirror his pain. Loss was universal, but the Keltori buried it beneath honor and vengeance. Their grief forged into blades or burned away in rituals. Elias carried his openly, not as a wound but as a reason to keep going, a fire that fueled his resolve. You fight for strangers, she said, almost to herself, stepping closer, her claws clicking softly against the floor. Why? He shrugged, a wry smile crossing his face, his eyes meeting hers without flinching. Because no one fought for me back then, he said, his voice quiet but firm. Figured I'd try to be better than that. Besides, those kids deserve a chance to grow up, to see the stars like I did. Maybe one of them will fly farther than I ever will. Vera's scales shifted, reflecting the map's glow in a cascade of colors, her tail curling closer to him, a subtle gesture of connection. Your kind confounds me, she admitted, her voice low, almost a whisper, a confession that broke the silence like a stone in still water. You are weak, yet you persist. You have no claws, no scales, yet you stand before me as if you belong. Elias met her gaze, unflinching, his voice steady despite the weight of her words. Maybe I don't belong, he said, leaning forward, his hands clasped on the table. But I'm not leaving until those people are safe. You'd do the same for your clan, wouldn't you? She stared at him, her golden eyes searching his, a storm of emotions flickering beneath her composed exterior. He was right. She would fight for her clan, her people, her honor without hesitation. But Elias fought for strangers, for a cause not his own, and that selflessness was a strength she couldn't comprehend, yet couldn't deny. The air between them crackled with unspoken tension, a fragile bridge forming across the chasm of their differences. Vera turned away, her tail brushing the floor, and left without another word, her heart racing with questions she wasn't ready to answer. But Elias's words lingered, a challenge to everything she'd been taught, a spark that threatened to ignite something new within her, a fire that burned brighter than any blade. The Spear of Dawn shuddered under a sudden attack, its hull breached by rogue Keltari separatists, their crystalline ships tearing through the Dominion's defenses with surgical precision. The Separatists were a splinter faction, radicals who rejected the Dominion's diplomacy, seeking to purge the galaxy of lesser species through fire and blood. Their ships were sleek and deadly, their hulls resonating with discordant harmonies, their weapons slicing through the Spear of Dawn's shields like knives through silk. The diplomatic mission became a desperate fight for survival, the chamber's bioluminescent veins flickering as power surged and failed. Vera led her warriors with ferocity, her plasma blade carving through enemy drones, her voice a roar over the comms as she rallied her crew, her armor glowing with violet fire. Her scales flashed as she moved, a whirlwind of lethal grace, her tail lashing as she struck, each blow a testament to her training, her bloodline, her unyielding will. But the Separatists were relentless, their tactics cunning and unpredictable, exploiting weaknesses Vera's tacticians had failed to anticipate, their ships weaving through the Dominion's defenses like needles through fabric. Elias, caught in a collapsing corridor, acted on instinct, his heart pounding but his mind clear, his years as a pilot guiding his hands. The walls groaned, sparks raining from severed conduits, the air thick with the acrid scent of burning metal. He scrambled to a damaged control panel, its screen flickering with error codes, his fingers flying over the controls as he pried it open, ignoring the electrical arcs that singed his hands. He rerouted power from a failing conduit to a turret, his movements swift and precise, honed by years of patching the Wanderer under fire. Sparks flew, searing his skin, but he gritted his teeth, his jaw tight, and slammed the panel shut. His hands blistered and bleeding. The turret roared to life, its plasma bolts lancing through the void, striking an enemy vessel's core in a blaze of light. The explosion sent shockwaves through the void, a silent fireball that crippled the separatist ship, giving Vera's forces a chance to regroup, turning the tide of the battle. Elias slumped against the wall, panting, his jumpsuit scorched, his hands trembling but his resolve unbroken. He was no soldier, but he knew how to survive, to seize a moment when it mattered most, to fight for those who depended on him. Vera found him amid the wreckage, his face streaked with soot and sweat, his breath ragged, his eyes bright with defiance despite his exhaustion. Her armor was scorched, her scales dulled by ash, but her eyes burned with a fierce intensity, a mix of disbelief and gratitude. She knelt beside him, her claws hovering as if unsure whether to touch him, her tail curling protectively. "You saved us," she said, her voice raw, breaking with emotion she'd been taught to suppress, her scales dimming in vulnerability. Elias managed a weak grin, wincing as he flexed his burned hands, his voice hoarse but laced with humor. "Had to," he panted, leaning against a bulkhead, his breath steadying. "Couldn't let those miners down. Or you." Her golden eyes widened, a storm of emotions flickering across her face. Shock, vulnerability, a warmth she couldn't name, a tide that threatened to sweep her away. "Me? You fought for me?" The thought was alien, unsettling, yet it warmed something deep within her, a part she'd long suppressed, a heart she'd buried beneath duty. Keltari warriors fought for honor, for the Dominion, their loyalty bound to clan and empire. But Elias's loyalty extended to her, not as a commander, but as a person, a soul he valued beyond rank or species. It was a concept her culture had no words for, yet it shook her to her core, a revelation that unraveled everything she believed, a light that pierced the shadows of her training. In the aftermath, as repair crews worked to stabilize the ship, their crystalline tools humming with harmonic tones, Vera summoned Elias to her quarters. The room was stark, its crystalline walls reflecting her armor's faint glow, a viewport framing the nebulous swirling hues like a painting of chaos and beauty. She stood by the viewport, her posture rigid, her tail still, her scales shimmering in the soft light. "I was wrong about you," she admitted, her voice low, her scales dimming in a rare display of vulnerability, a confession that cost her more than any battle. "I saw only frailty, a creature to be pitied or ignored. I was blind to your strength. Your body is weak, your life brief, but your spirit, it burns like a star, brighter than any blade I have wielded, fiercer than any warrior I have known." Elias leaned against the wall, his posture relaxed but his eyes locked on hers, searching, his burns bandaged but his spirit unbowed. "You're not so bad yourself, Commander," he said, a hint of a smile softening his words, his voice warm with respect. "You fight for your people, put everything on the line for them. That's not nothing. I respect that more than you know. It takes guts to lead like you do to carry that weight." She stepped closer, her tail curling slightly, as if drawn to him despite herself, her claws flexing at her sides. "Respect?" she murmured, testing the word, her voice low and thoughtful, a ripple of scales reflecting her inner turmoil. "Is that what this is?" She reached into a compartment, retrieving a Keltari medallion etched with intricate symbols of honor, its surface cool and heavy, a relic of her clan's legacy. She placed it in his hand, her scaled fingers brushing his burned skin, lingering for a moment longer than necessary, a touch that sent a shiver through them both. The contact was electric, a spark that ignited something neither could name, a fragile thread weaving between them, binding human and Keltari in a way that defied the galaxy's laws. As the ship underwent repairs, its corridors humming with the work of crystalline drones, Elias and Vera found themselves drawn together, their interactions a delicate dance of curiosity, caution, and growing trust. She invited him to a training hall, its walls lined with crystalline blades and hollow targets that shimmered like trapped stars, and taught him Keltari combat stances. Her laughter, a rare, musical sound, like chimes in a storm, echoed when he stumbled over her tail, sprawling onto the mat with a grunt, his face flushed with embarrassment. "You move like a newborn hatchling," she teased, her eyes warm with amusement, a stark contrast to the commander who'd once mocked him. She helped him up, her grip firm but gentle, and for a moment, their hands lingered, her scales cool against his skin, a silent acknowledgement of the bond forming between them. Elias tried again, his movements clumsy but determined, his jaw set as he mirrored her stance, earning a nod of approval that warmed him more than he'd admit. Elias shared human culture in return, inviting her to his guest chamber, a cramped space he'd made his own, with a salvaged hollow projector casting faint light, a stash of data chips scattered on the bench, and a battered coffee maker he'd rigged to run on the ship's power. He played a haunting ballad through his data slate, a slow, soulful tune from a long-dead Earth composer, its notes weaving a story of loss and hope, of lovers parted by war. Vera sat across from him, her tail curled around her, and swayed to the melody, her scales catching the light in a mesmerizing dance, each movement a reflection of the music's pull. "She's beautiful," Elias thought, his breath catching, not just in form, but in the fire that drives her. Her strength wasn't just in her blade or her armor. It was in her unyielding will, her loyalty to her people, and now, perhaps, in the vulnerability she dared to show him. He told her about the song's origins, a tale of a forgotten war and a lover's promise to return, his voice soft with memory, and saw her eyes soften, a flicker of understanding crossing her face, a bridge between their worlds. Vera felt undone by his presence, her warrior's discipline fraying at the edges, her heart stirring with emotions she'd been taught to purge. "His kindness is a poison," she thought, "a weakness I cannot resist. It makes me want to be more than a weapon." For the first time, she questioned the Keltari's rigid code, the belief that emotions were a flaw to be eradicated, that strength was only found in conquest. Elias's warmth, his quiet defiance, his willingness to risk everything for strangers. It challenged everything she'd been taught, a light that pierced the shadows of her training. She found herself seeking him out, not as a commander but as Vera, a woman who had never known what it meant to be seen, to be valued for more than her strength or her rank. Their bond deepened in stolen moments, each one a rebellion against the galaxy's divides, a quiet defiance of the laws that kept their worlds apart. They stood together on the observation deck, watching the nebula shift and swirl, its colors a silent witness to their growing connection. Elias told her stories of his travels, dodging pirate fleets in a crippled ship, landing on worlds where the sky burned green and the air sang with static, bartering with traders who spoke in colors instead of words. His voice was warm, his laughter infectious, and Vera found herself smiling, a rare expression that softened her angular features, her scales shimmering with delight. She shared fragments of her past, her first battle, a bloody clash where she'd earned her first scar, a jagged mark across her shoulder, the weight of her clan's expectations, their pride in her rise to command, the solitude of leading a fleet, where every decision was hers alone, a burden she carried without complaint. Their differences, once a chasm, became a bridge, each revelation drawing them closer, their hearts entwining like the nebulous strands. One evening, Elias showed her a hollow image from his data slate, a grainy snapshot of a desert world, its horizon glowing under twin suns, dunes stretching into the distance like waves frozen in time. "My home," he said, his voice tinged with nostalgia, his fingers tracing the image. "Before the raiders came, used to climb the dunes with my sister, pretend we were explorers on some uncharted planet. She'd make up stories about alien cities hidden in the sand, whole empires waiting to be found." He paused, his smile fading, his eyes distant. "She didn't make it out, but I still think of her when I see a sunset like that, or when I'm out there, flying. It feels like she's still with me, somehow." Vera's tail curled closer, brushing his leg, a gesture of comfort she didn't fully understand, her scales dimming with empathy. "My kin are warriors," she said quietly, her voice soft, a contrast to her usual command. "We do not speak of those we lose. Their names are carved into our blades, their honor carried in our blood. But I understand your pain. My brother fell in a duel defending our clan's name. He was young, brash, but fierce. I see him in the stars, sometimes in the light of a nebula like this. Elias looked at her, his eyes soft, a warmth that reached across the void between them. Maybe they're out there, watching us fumble through this mess, he said, a wry chuckle breaking the silence, his voice light but laced with shared grief. Bet they'd have a laugh at me trying to negotiate with you. Vera's lips twitched, a near smile, her scales shimmering with a quiet joy. They would marvel at your audacity, Starborn, she said, her voice warm. The nickname now an endearment, a private bond between them, a vow unspoken but felt. She reached out, her claws hesitating, then touched his hand, a tentative gesture that carried the weight of her trust. Her scales cool against his skin. Their first kiss came under the nebulous glow, on the observation deck where they'd first spoken of freedom, a moment that felt like destiny and defiance in equal measure. Vera stood close, her armor discarded, her scales shimmering in the soft light, her tunic revealing the intricate patterns etched into her skin, each a story of her battles, her bloodline. Elias reached out, his hand trembling slightly, and brushed a strand of her hair, fine as silk, despite its metallic sheen, behind her ear, his fingers lingering on her cheek. She froze, her scales flaring with uncertainty. Her breath catching as emotions she'd been taught to suppress surged within her, a tide that threatened to drown her discipline. But Elias's gentle smile anchored her, a beacon in the storm of her doubts, his eyes warm with a love he hadn't yet named. Their lips met, tentative at first, a brush of warmth against cool scales, a moment of hesitation as their worlds collided. Then it deepened, fierce and unyielding, as if the galaxy itself could not pull them apart, a fire that burned through the barriers of species and duty. This is forbidden, she thought, her heart racing, yet it feels like salvation. The kiss was a rebellion, a defiance of empires and expectations, and in that moment, they were no longer human and Keltari, just Elias and Vera, two souls finding each other in the dark, their love a spark that could light the void. But duty loomed like a shadow, cold and unyielding, threatening to shatter their fragile bond, a specter that haunted their every moment. The Separatists regrouped, their crystalline ships massing for a strike on Hope's cradle, their intent clear, to purge the colony and send a message to the Dominion and the galaxy. Vera received orders from the Dominion's High Council, delivered via a hollow transmission that crackled with authority. Destroy the colony to prevent further rebellion, a show of strength to crush dissent and secure her clan's honor. She stood on the bridge, her claws digging into the console, her scales dim with turmoil, her tail lashing as she stared at the orders, their words searing her mind. The command was clear, logical, aligned with everything she'd been trained to uphold: strength above all. The Dominions will above mercy. But it would mean annihilation for the people Elias fought for, the families he spoke of with such quiet passion, the children whose waves haunted her thoughts, their laughter echoing in her memory. It would mean betraying him, breaking the trust they'd built, and extinguishing the spark that had awakened her heart, the love that had made her question her purpose. Elias sensed her turmoil and sought her out in her quarters, finding her staring at the nebula, her posture rigid, her hands clasped behind her back, her scales pulsing with restrained emotion. He stepped into the room uninvited, a boldness that once would have earned her wrath, his jumpsuit patched and his burns bandaged, his eyes searching hers. "You don't have to do this," he said, his voice low but urgent, closing the distance between them. "There's another way. Let me help." She turned to him, her eyes stormy with conflict, her tail lashing, a ripple of scales that betrayed her inner chaos. "You asked me to defy my people, my purpose?" she said, her voice cracking, a rare fracture in her commander's resolve, her claws flexing at her sides. "I am Keltari. Duty is my blood, my honor, my life. To disobey is to forsake everything I am, to betray my clan, my ancestors, the stars that birthed me." Elias stepped closer, unafraid of her towering presence, his eyes locked on hers, his voice steady, earnest, a lifeline in her storm. Duty doesn't have to mean destruction, he said. His words a quiet plea, his hands open at his sides, offering trust. Those people, they're not your enemy. They're just trying to survive like you, like me. We can save them together. You're not just a weapon, Vera. You're more than that. I've seen it in the way you lead, the way you care, even when you try to hide it. You're fierce, yeah, but you're you. And that's enough. Her scales flared, a burst of light that illuminated the room. Her breath catching as his words pierced her defenses, striking at the core of her doubts. She saw the miners through his eyes, not as vermin or rebels, but as lives worth saving, as souls with dreams and fears like her own, as children who deserved to see the stars. For the first time, she imagined a future where strength meant more than conquest, where honor included compassion, where she could be more than the blade her people had forged her to be. She thought of her brother, his laughter, his sacrifice, and wondered if he'd approve of this choice. To fight for life, not death. Elias proposed a desperate gambit. Use the Wanderer to lure the Separatists into a trap, drawing them into a narrow asteroid field where Vera's forces could ambush them. The plan was near suicidal. The Wanderer was a cargo hauler, not a warship, its hull patched with salvaged plates, its shields barely functional, its engines coughing under strain. Elias would be a lone target in a sea of enemies, facing ships that could tear him apart in seconds, their weapons designed to shed Dominion warships, let alone a human freighter. But he was calm, his hands steady as he squeezed hers, his fingers warm against her cold scales, his grin a spark of defiance. "I've outrun worse," he said, his eyes bright with mischief, his voice laced with the confidence of a man who cheated death too many times to count. "Pirates, storms, even a black hole once, barely. Got a story about that one if we make it through this. It's a good one, involves a drunk navigator and a bet gone wrong." Vera's laughter broke free, a sharp, unexpected sound that startled them both, a chime that echoed in the quiet of her quarters. "You are madness incarnate," she said, shaking her head, her voice thick with emotion, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. A vulnerability no Keltari would dare show, a crack in her armor that was his alone to see. "If you die, Elias, I will never forgive you," she said, her voice breaking on his name, a confession of the love she couldn't yet voice, her tail curling closer, brushing his leg. He chuckled, brushing a thumb across her scaled hand, his touch grounding her in the chaos of her heart, a warmth that steadied her. "Then I'll just have to live," he said, his voice soft but resolute, a vow as binding as any Keltari oath, a promise sealed with the weight of his heart. The plan unfolded with breathless precision, a high-stakes dance on the edge of annihilation, a test of courage and trust. Elias piloted the Wanderer into the asteroid field, his ship weaving between jagged rocks and the Separatists' relentless barrage, his hands flying over the controls, his instincts honed by years of narrow escapes. The ship's hull groaned, its engines screaming as he pushed them beyond their limits, plasma bolts grazing the shields, sparks flying from overloaded systems. He taunted the enemy over open comms, his voice laced with defiance to draw them deeper into the trap, his grin fierce despite the sweat beading on his brow. "Come on, you shiny bastards," he muttered, jinking past a missile, the ship shuddering under the impact of debris, his heart pounding but his focus razor-sharp. "Follow the vermin. Let's see how you handle a real chase." Vera's forces waited in the dark, their warships cloaked among the asteroids, their weapons primed, their crews silent as they tracked the battle. She stood on the bridge of the Spear of Dawn, her claws gripping the console, her eyes fixed on the sensor display where the Wanderer's signal blazed like a lone star, a beacon of hope and fear. Her heart was a battlefield, torn between her warrior's discipline and the terror that gripped her at the thought of losing him, her scales pulsing with every near miss, every spark that flared from his ship. She issued commands with precision, her voice steady despite the chaos, her orders cutting through the bridge like a blade. But her mind was with Elias, her soul tethered to his signal. When he triggered a flare from his engines, the signal to strike, she unleashed her fleet, their warships converging like a pack of wolves, their plasma lances tearing through the Separatists' crystalline holes in silent fireballs, the void alight with the wreckage of their enemies. But the Wanderer took a hit, its hull sparking, its trajectory faltering, a gash torn in its side that vented atmosphere into the void. Vera's world narrowed to that single, flickering signal, her claws digging into the console, her breath caught in her throat, her vision blurring with fear. She thought of Elias's grin, his stories, the warmth of his hand in hers, the future they dared to imagine. A life beyond duty, beyond war. No, she whispered, a plea to a universe that offered no mercy. Her voice breaking, her scales dimming with dread. The bridge was silent, her crew watching their commander, but she didn't care. She was no longer just a warrior, but a woman who loved him, a soul laid bare by the threat of loss. The comms crackled, and Elias's voice broke through, rough and raw but alive with triumph, a sound that shattered her fear like glass. "Told you I'd make it," he said, a breathless chuckle cutting through the static, his voice weak but defiant, a spark that reignited her hope. Vera exhaled, her laughter mingling with tears she refused to acknowledge, her scales flaring with relief, her heart racing with a joy that was theirs. A shared defiance of the odds, a victory forged in trust and love. The Separatists were routed, their ships shattered into glittering shards among the asteroids, their fragments drifting like snow in the void, a silent testament to their defeat. Hope's cradle was saved, its habdomes gleaming under the asteroid's faint glow, a beacon of human resilience, a home preserved against the galaxy's wrath. Vera defied her superiors, transmitting Elias's survey records and her own testimony to the Dominion's High Council, her hololink crackling with the weight of her words. She stood before them, her armor gleaming, her scales blazing with conviction, her voice steady as a pillar of light. "The humans are not weak," she declared, her words ringing with the force of her honor, her clan's legacy, and the truth she'd found in a human's courage. "Their strength lies in their will, their heart to endure, to protect what is theirs. They are not our inferiors, they are our equals, our allies. We dismiss them at our peril." She spoke of the Separatist attack, of Elias's gambit, of the lives saved by their partnership, her voice unwavering as she recounted his bravery, his sacrifice, his unyielding spirit. She presented the survey data, its timestamps a silent rebuke to the Dominion's claims, and her own actions, defying orders to save the colony, a challenge to their rigid code. The Council, swayed by her resolve, the undeniable proof of the Separatists' defeat, and the strategic value of peace, granted a provisional ceasefire, a fragile truce that bought the colony time to rebuild and the coalition a chance to negotiate on equal footing. It was a victory, hard-won and imperfect, but a triumph of heart over might, a testament to the power of trust and love across worlds. Back on the Spear of Dawn, Elias and Vera stood together on the observation deck, the nebula painting their faces in shades of violet, gold, and crimson, a cosmic canvas for their shared journey. Her tail curled gently around his waist, a gesture as intimate as it was protective, her scales warm against his side, a silent vow of her presence. Elias's burns were bandaged, his jumpsuit patched yet again, but his eyes were bright, his smile a beacon of hope, his hand resting on hers, his fingers tracing the patterns of her scales. "What now?" she asked, her voice soft, almost hesitant, as if the future were a star she feared to reach for, yet longed to touch, her golden eyes searching his, a vulnerability only he could see. Elias looked out at the stars, his gaze distant but warm, his voice rich with possibility, a promise of adventure. "Keep flying," he said, his hand tightening on hers, a vow sealed in the quiet of the stars. "There's a whole galaxy out there, worlds with skies that sing, markets where you can trade a story for a meal, nebulae that make this one look like a candle. I've seen gas giants with storms that dance, moons where the ice glows like fire. Traders will swap you a ship's core for a good joke. There's a planet out there, Vera, where the auroras play music, low and deep, like the heartbeat of the world. I want to show you that, show you everything. Maybe you'll come with me. See what else the stars hold." Vera smiled, a rare expression that softened her angular features. her warrior's edge tempered by a warmth she'd never known, her scales shimmering with a quiet joy. "You speak of dreams, starborn," she said, her voice rich with affection. The nickname now a vow, a bond forged in fire and trust. "I am Keltari, my life is duty, my blood is battle. But with you, perhaps I can learn to chase horizons, to see the stars as you do, to find a purpose beyond conquest." He leaned closer, his forehead brushing hers, a human gesture she'd come to cherish, his breath warm against her scales. "We'll chase them together," he said, his voice a whisper, a promise sealed with the weight of his heart, a vow that bound them beyond species or empires. "You and me against the galaxy. We'll find those auroras, listen to their song, and maybe write a few stories of our own." She closed her eyes, her scales shimmering, and let herself believe in it. A future where strength and compassion intertwined, where honor included love, where she could be Vera, not just a commander, but a woman who dreamed with a man who'd changed her world. The Keltari did not dream of horizons, but with Elias, she saw one worth chasing, a path of light through the dark, a journey they'd face together. In a galaxy that mocked their fragility, Elias and Vera forged a bond that defied empires, a love that burned brighter than the stars. Humanity, it seemed, had a way of surprising the cosmos and each other. Their story was a beacon, a testament to the power of heart, of courage, of connection across worlds. They stood together, human and Keltari, their hands entwined, their hearts beating as one, ready to face whatever the galaxy held. Their love a spark that could light up the void, a reminder that even the smallest flame can outshine the darkest night, a fire that would burn through the ages, a legend written in the stars.